Last week, the federal government announced it would be unable to meet its promise of lifting all the boil water advisories in Canada by March of 2021. It fell to the Minister of Indigenous Services, Marc Miller, to break that news that no one wanted to hear. He is the Liberal member of Parliament for the riding of Ville-Marie, Le Sud-Ouest, Île-des-Sœurs. And he joins us now from the House of Commons in the nation's capital. Minister, we're grateful you spared some time for us. How are you managing during this pandemic?
Oh, good, Steve. Trying to keep up. A lot of work to do fighting the second wave.
Undoubtedly. Let us just, by way of background, put a bit of a fact file up here just so people understand how you got to where you got to. And Sheldon, if you would, here comes the graphic here. Between 2015 and 2020, 97 long-term drinking water advisories were in fact lifted across Canada by the federal government. 59 remain, and those are in 41 communities. The original commitment by the feds was to lift all drinking water advisories in First Nations communities by March 2021. That, of course, is now not going to happen. In the fall economic statement, the feds announced $1.5 billion would be invested to ensure clean drinking water for Indigenous peoples. And since 2016, the feds have made more than $2 billion in commitments to First Nations to build and repair water and wastewater infrastructure. And I guess let's just start here. What was the so-called straw that broke the camel's back where you had that aha moment when you realized we're not going to get this done?
Well, look, first, thanks, Steve, for taking the time to speak about this exceedingly important issue to all Canadians, particularly Indigenous peoples that have been entirely underserved by in an area of critical water infrastructure over decades. But you spoke about the straw that broke the camel's back, and it's a bit of a simplification for the greater challenge of having essentially lost, in some cases, an entire construction season, limited in some cases in remote and northern communities by the impact of COVID as communities shut down to protect their people and to preserve their health, which is something that we absolutely must respect. That is one of the greater challenges we faced over the course of 6 months. But I certainly didn't want to be in a position of standing up and talking to Canadians and saying this is the case when we hadn't seen and charted the course of what COVID may do. And now, while we're in the midst of a second wave and communities are rightfully shutting down, we see that course that is being charted for us. And we took stock of that, and I went back to the Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance to work for a number of funds that would ensure that we would work with communities throughout what is still very an unpredictable path of COVID, but also a long-term investment. And I think that's what's worth speaking a little longer about in ensuring that we are with communities every step of the way past this, what we've categorized, I guess, as an Ottawa imposed deadline of spring 2021. For something that really is a question of long-term asset management of critical infrastructure in communities, which is water. And I recognize that there are a number of communities that are left. We could knock another one off based on an announcement yesterday, but there are still, there's still, as you said, about 41 communities that are left to lift.
But just so I'm clear on this,
quietly
Minister,
optimistic, but we're making the investments that are needed to be made.
I understand. So I'm clear, had it not been for COVID-19 then, are you saying the commitment would have been fulfilled?
Steve, it's very, very difficult to dissociate the two. And I say this because there are a multiplicity of challenges, one of which is COVID. We knew that it was an aggressive timeline going into the year as I was working with my teams, and it really becomes a community by community analysis in seeing what needs to be done to lift each water advisory. There were certainly challenges. There were certain, for example, interim solutions that are being proposed as we work with communities that communities in some cases have rejected, compounded as by COVID, seeing what the long-term plan is for their communities. And we've committed to them to a more longer-term solution, for example, building a new plant, building out some of the infrastructure that is connected to water. And these are commitments that communities rightfully ask of the federal government, and I think it's something that we need to recognize and fund. The commitment itself of $1.5 billion recognizes that there needs to be real investments in fighting COVID, but also working towards long-term solutions, including a recurring generalization that makes sense, which is funding 100% of operations and management of these facilities, which in some cases are state-of-the-art, and people working in them are the pride of their community and can easily be poached by another community that is often non-Indigenous that will pay them more. So really a spectrum of continuity that we were investing in was being demanded of us from Indigenous communities, and wasn't necessarily following in the strict categories of, I guess, quote unquote, lifting a long-term water advisory, which I would remind your listeners is something that communities do and the federal government doesn't do.
No, I take your point on that, but the reason I asked the question is that we did a program on this a few nights ago, and we had Indigenous leaders on the program, and they did acknowledge that, of course, they have closed off their communities to outsiders in order to keep COVID-19 at bay, which may have played some part of a role in all of this. But they added that, yeah, if anybody wants to say that that's the reason, that's really just making an excuse. That's not the reason. There's other reasons as well. Is that fair for them to make that point?
Well, I don't deny that there was a number of challenges in the remaining advisories, and including those that are on short-term advisories, which can't be neglected in this discussion, because some of the persistent investments that we need to keep making is to prevent those short-term water advisories from becoming long-term, which they do after a year without being addressed. Part of this, and this is perhaps what they are alluding to, is that requirement from the federal government to make more long-term investments to ensure that there's water continuity in their communities that have been in a precarious position, in some cases for a quarter of a century. And so I take that criticism, and it is one, when you look at what we think will be the 12 or so communities representing about 21 advisories as of spring 2021 that will be remaining, you can roughly break them down, and it's a difficult breakdown to do. You can break them down into about 6 or 7 communities that were, yes, affected by COVID, and we're going to be with them in the long term. And then about a half dozen more that had other concerns. For example, a new build, and I'll take the example of Shoal Lake 40, with respect to which we had to build a whole new road going in, and everyone that knows the story about Shoal Lake 40 knows all the complexities that have been associated with that. And that was the preference expressed by the community, and we're working hand in hand with them. And that will indeed take a long-term approach. And I know a lot of your listeners are saying, well, when's that next deadline? When's that next deadline? And I think the effort that I've tried to be with my ministry is to be as open and frank with Canadians as possible. And the position I want to be in about spring 2021 is to be able to identify exactly the deadlines associated with the remaining communities. And now, obviously, there's a confidentiality of community membership of the leadership demands of us, but those communities that want to be open and transparent of it, we will be more than glad to facilitate that, so that every Canadian knows what that deadline is and when they can expect clean water to be in those communities.
And in fairness, the people I talk to about you say, you know, he's a good guy, his heart's in the right place, he understands the problem, he really does want to make good on this. Having said that, you know, we do have a First Nation in the northwestern part of this province, Neskangtaga, which, you know, no one under the age of 25 has been able to drink clean water there. This is the longest boil water advisory in the entire country. And one does wonder how, in a developed country like ours, no government over the last 25 years has been able to figure this out. How is that possible?
It's entirely unacceptable, Steve. We're talking about a quarter of a century. If any Canadian can look at that situation and think profoundly about it, I would welcome them to do that. What I have been asked by the Prime Minister to do, and as a human, I'm more than glad to do my absolute best in ensuring that Skandiga gets clean water, is to fix that problem. There's a community that's not so far away from them called Lac Seul that with respect to which we lifted in earlier on in the year, but they had been in a situation for about 17 years on a long-term water advisories. These exist in that area of Northern Ontario, which is it has its challenges. But as you said, when I spoke to the room in Lac Seul, there was anyone who was adolescent age had never had clean water. And one of the older people I sat beside remarked that this was the first time that she would be able to shower and not itch afterwards. And that is happening in a country like Canada. It's something that this government has worked really hard. You mentioned $2 billion, and with the $1.5 billion that we've invested, we are working exceedingly hard to fix that. With respect to Neskangtaga, who has been in a situation even longer than Lac Seul, so 25 years, we're cautiously optimistic that the community that is currently in Thunder Bay will be repatriated before Christmas. With that plant, the new system up and running and is currently being tested in days 6 or 7 of a testing cycle that lasts about 14 days. and that they will have clean water in very short order. I would also add this, the communities do lift these long-term water advisories. And sometimes when there is clean water, they want to take their time to make sure everything's right and to make sure that they have the support of the federal government. For example, in sensitizing the community that is still very fearful of even a clean water system. And as they are sheltering in Thunder Bay, a lot of them still prefer to use bottled water because of that hesitancy. It's a very real lived experience that they have. It is one with which we have to take our time to ensure we partner with that community so that we can gradually encourage them to use that water that is safe, but with respect to which they have a lot of hesitancy. And that's something that it's a nuance that we need to appreciate, because it is certainly something as a minister I didn't appreciate going in. I thought you could just lift these things and move on, and that is certainly not the case. We need to continually be in partnership with those communities. And the chief of Neskantaga, a very forceful advocate for his people, keeps saying that, and I certainly respect his voice when it comes to water.
Well, tell us, I think you have to explain to us how it's possible that in 25 years this problem hasn't been solved. So what is it that Canadians don't appreciate about how difficult it is to solve this issue?
Well, and sometimes certainly, Steve, it's a function of remoteness. It's a function of distance. It's a function of the particular geological conditions of the community. That doesn't explain everything. A lot of it is just the function of a system that has been inherently discriminatory towards Indigenous peoples. You look at a situation, for example, that is still unresolved in many respects in Six Nations, which sits beside Brantford and Toronto. There's no reason why there shouldn't be clean water going into households, and yet that is still the case today.
But why is that the case?
Well, a function of systemic undercapitalization of First Nations on reserves in particular. Successive governments not appreciating the degree and scope of the problem. It's coupled with a more massive undercapitalization in infrastructure generally.
Do First Nations themselves not have the skills to know how to maintain and operate these plants?
They absolutely do, and that is a huge part of the puzzle going forward, ensuring that training is there in the community, that the capacity and all the brilliance that exists within that community gets the training with respect to state-of-the-art facilities. We know that water standards, particularly in Ontario, are very high. So ensuring they have the supports and the financial backing of the government of Canada. Sometimes it's a question of the Canada getting the resources and then getting out of the way. But that is a very important part of the puzzle, because you want to ensure that continuity within plants. But you asked me about an explanation of why that is the case. I don't think I can offer a proper explanation to Canadians as to why that's been the case for a community that has been in a long-term water advisory for 25 years. What I can say to Canadians is that for the last 5 years, this government has made successive investments, massive investments into fixing this problem that every Canadian wants to see fixed, and water in the communities, and will continue to do so, more so after spring 2021, so that we ensure that communities don't fall back into long-term and then rather short-term and then long-term water advisories, as should not happen to any Canadian or Indigenous person.
Sure. Forgive me, Minister, we're down to our last minute here, but I'll give you an explanation that was offered by one of our guests the other night, and you can comment on it. His explanation was, it didn't matter what government was in power over the last 25 years, none of them gave enough of a damn or put a high enough priority on getting this problem solved, and that's why 25 years later, it persists. Is that a fair observation?
I think it's important for viewers to be left with those thoughts and to reflect on them. I do know the now close to $4 billion this community has invested into it. It's come under the leadership of Justin Trudeau. There's a heck of a lot of work to be done. Certainly getting into power, we didn't perhaps appreciate the full scope of the undercapitalization that occurred. It's something that we continually struggle with, but we can only fix it in partnership with Indigenous communities. But I will let those words speak for themselves.
Minister, we understand what your schedule is like these days, so we're really grateful you spared some time for our viewers here on TVO tonight. That's Marc Miller, the Federal Minister of Indigenous Services, coming to us from the nation's capital. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.